Hello, and welcome back to the They Don't Tell the Truth podcast, where I interview regular people with incredible stories. Today's guest is someone who has explored the darkest levels of spirituality, one of them being Freemasonry. He became a 33rd degree Mason, was part of high-level secret societies, and he is not afraid to share what he's not supposed to talk about. So I took this opportunity to ask him as much as I could in the limited time that we had. No matter how much you know or don't know about Freemasonry, I can almost guarantee you that you'll learn a lot from this interview, as everything that is shared here is in some way related to it. Get ready to have your mind blown by Mr. Bill Schnoebelen as he shares the dark journey that he and his wife took, and the unsettling things that they uncovered along the way. When I got to college, and again, I wanted to be a priest, this was a minor seminary college, Loras College at the time. It was a minor seminary. It isn't anymore. I had a priest in my theology class who had a doctorate in theology, and he was teaching a course in Christology because, again, I was wanting to be a priest. And he took me aside and he said, if you want to be a priest, in the Catholic Church it's taught, sacerdotus est altus Christus, the priest is another Christ. So if you want to be like Christ, and he says to me, do you want to be like Christ? And I said, well, of course. Doesn't every Christian want to be like Christ? And he said, well, if you want to be like Christ, you need to do what Christ did. And again, that made sense. And again, nowadays we've kind of become suspicious about priests, but this was like 1968, and a priest was like God. I mean, whatever the priest said, that was it, And he said, well, if you want to be like Christ, then you need to do what he did. And he went to the East and studied with the gurus in India. He went and studied with the lamas in Tibet. He went to Egypt and studied with the magicians there. That's how he was able to raise the dead, to walk on water, to do all these miracles. So he says, what you need to do is you need to start studying the occult. And this is a priest telling me this, and so I thought, okay, now mind you, this is obviously decades before there was an internet. I mean, there was a little bookstore downtown, and I went there, and I found a few scattering books on, like, the occult, and I found this book that was called Diary of a Witch by Sybil Leek. And she was one of the very first witches to, so to speak, come out of the broom closet. She was a British woman, and she was a medium. And anyhow, I read the book, and she was asserting in the book that witches were not evil, that this was an ancient pagan mystery religion. Among other things, she claimed that Jesus was a witch, and his 12 apostles were his coven along with their wives, So I kind of bought into that, and I found out about this guy, Alexander's, who was the supposed king of the witches over in London. I sent him a letter. This is around 1968. 69, and his wife sent me back a thing. Okay, here's a coven in Rockford, Illinois, which is about 90 minutes from Dubuque. I went there and I got initiated as a witch. And then later on, I hooked up with an Alexandrian coven in Boston, and I was made a witch high priest. Started covens in, first of all, in Dubuque, where I was, and then moved to Milwaukee because there was a fellow there who had an occult bookstore. Because Milwaukee is a huge city, and he said, I've got all these people that want to become witches. Can you come and teach them? When we're talking about, like, you being in a coven and you doing witchcraft, I just want to make sure that we don't skip over that part. Like, what kind of witchcraft are we talking about? Because there's a lot. Bill Schnoebelen, VO. It was okay. Witchcraft originally, the kind of publicly available witchcraft was originally started by Gerald Gardner, and he came out and witchcraft became legal in England. It was a crime until 1951. It was made legal. And he claimed, and all of this is disputed, but he claimed that he came in contact with an ancient coven of witches in the New Forest region of England. They initiated him and then made him a high priest, and he went off and initiated other people. Then there's this other bunch, this Alexander's fellow. He also claims to have been initiated by an ancient line of witches by his grandmother. So those were the two main fountainheads of witchcraft in the 60s. Both were from England, but both had, spread to America, and it was white witchcraft. Both groups, their rituals were virtually identical, and but the Alexandrian group that I was in was more into ceremonial magic, which is like kind of, If you know, and like Protestantism, they have the distinction between high church and low church. Well, Alexandrian is more high church witchcraft. But we didn't believe in the devil. We didn't think we were worshipping the devil. We thought we were worshipping a goddess, a moon goddess, and a horn god. So it was like a diatheism, if you will, two deities. And we didn't believe in demons. We just believed that it was all this nature, airy, fairy, gathering herbs in the forest and dancing in the nude. And, it all sounds very innocent, except there's, especially in the Alexandrian, right? There's also some sex magic that's involved. Interviewer, VO. So does that kind of answer your question? Bill Schnoebelen, VO. Yes. Interviewer, VO. Yes. Thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to make sure that we got that covered. So actually, let's go back to the occult bookstore that you were talking about, and let's pick up the story from there. Bill Schnoebelen, VO. Well, so anyway, so we hooked up with this fellow, and in the basement of the store we would hold these classes. They were packed because there were all these people. And again, this was 1972, and there was all these people are kind of like quasi-hippies, and they wanted to get into the occult magic and blah, blah, blah. The other thing that happened at the same time is that we encountered this fellow called Eli, who was the Grand Master Druid of North America. And Druids are a little bit different than witches. It's kind of like the difference between being a Baptist and being a Methodist, And we were invited down to Arkansas, which is where this fellow lived. He had lived on top of a mountain. He had kind of a what do you call it, organic farm there. And we went through the whole summer. Got all this occult training. We were, high priests in Druidism by the time we got done. At one point, understand this fellow that owned the occult bookstore, he was kind of a manipulative guy who was very, he was older than me, very cunning, he told me. He took me aside and he said, if you really want to understand magic, you need to read this book. And he handed me the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey, and I said, well, why would I want to read the Satanic Bible? Witches don't believe in Satan. And he said, well, just read the book. And his LaVey's contention was that magic is really about Satan, but Satan is like an archetype. He said there is no real Satan, but it's like an energy, egregore, an archetype that you can draw upon. And it kind of made sense to me. And again, the devil was gradually pulling me in. Like the whole thing about the camel getting its nose into the tent, before you know it, the camel's in there. So I wrote to the Church of Satan, which at that time was in San Francisco. I became a member, a first-degree member. And then later on, I went through some exams and studies, and I became a warlock, which was a second-degree member of the Church of Satan. And at this, also I should say this, because this is critical, this Eli guy, the Grand Druid down in Arkansas, he gave us 2 words of advice. First of all, he said, if you really want to understand Luciferian energy, you need to join the Freemasonic order, and he himself was a 33rd degree Mason. He showed me his little certificate that he'd got. He also told me that if he ever felt like we were in deep spiritual trouble, that I should join the Mormon Church, because it was a church that had been started by witches, 4 witches, that we could hang out in and pretend to be nice. You know the image of the Mormon Church, that they're straight, nice, wonderful, all-American people with happy families and white picket fences and all of that. But secretly, they believe almost the same doctrines that witches believe. And we can get into that if you want. But anyhow, so he gave us that advice. And again, this was in the early 70s. So I joined the Masonic Lodge, became a Master Mason. At the same time as I was a Satanist and a witch, and only our inner circle of the witches that by this time we've initiated over 100 witches, and only our inner circle knew that we were also Satanist. And we were continuing in this. And I finally figured out that there was a deeper level of Satanism. And I got in touch with some of them. And again, there was no internet. We had to do all this by mail and whatnot. And there was a group in Michigan called the Order of the Black Ram, which is like more hardcore satanic stuff. There was another group in Chicago called the Brotherhood, and I got involved with them because they were closer, because Milwaukee is just up the road, about 90 miles from Chicago. And I got really, I sold my soul to the devil. That's how deep I got into this stuff. Yeah, before we actually get to that part, I want to make sure to take some time to talk about Freemasonry. Because Freemasonry, it's very rare to actually talk about to talk to former Masons because it's something that you're not supposed to talk about. So it's kind of an opportunity while I have you here to kind of, for me personally, to learn, but also for the people to kind of have a knowledge about what Freemasonry is. You said that you became a Master Mason. Can you explain how the degrees and the lodges are set up in Freemasonry so people actually understand what we're talking about? Well, they're okay. The basic thing is what's called the Blue Lodge, and that consists of 3 degrees: Entered Apprentice, Fellowcraft, and Master Mason. A lot of Masons never go any further than that. I did, but basically it's like an initiatory process. The requirements are you have to, at that time, now, mind you, this was, I think I joined in 75, you had to be a man, freeborn, of good report and well recommended. So they ask you if you believe in God, and I said yes, I did, and I didn't. They didn't ask which God I believed in, they just, can you believe in God? And I said yes. I didn't tell them that the God I believed in had horns. So anyhow, I went through there's this whole process. You do a lot of memory work. They call it, you memorize all of these ritual things. You have a mentor who's called your poster, who's an older Mason, and the guy that I had was a real very kind guy, an executive in the power company. I can't remember the name of the company, and he helped me memorize all this stuff. And then you go to 2nd degree, and then they have a whole bunch of stuff to memorize. And just let me touch this briefly, because people ask me, well, at what point does Masonry start to look creepy? I mean, because there's tons of Christians that are Masons, literally thousands of them, and I just ask them, how can you do that? I mean, because when you start out as a Mason, they make you come to the lodge, they make you take off all your clothes except your undies. They put you in this, like jammies, they're like, they're like pajamas. They're like, typically the one knee is bare. And one breast is bare, your left breast, and I think your right knee, and you're blindfolded, and you have a cable around your neck. It's like a velvet, they call it a cable tow. It's like a velvet blue rope, and you're tied up and you're led to the door of the lodge, and you've got a guy leading you because of course you're blindfolded, and he knocks on the door, and somebody this is all ritualized, and the guy on the other side says, who comes here? And your guy who's guiding you, who's a lodge officer, he says, Mr. Bill Schnoebelen, who has been long in darkness, and now seeks to be brought to light to receive the rights and benefits of the worship of the lodge erected to God, as all members have done before. And I ask Mr. Christian, Mr. Pastor, Mr. Elder, because there's, like it used to be, I don't know if it still is, it used to be 40% of the pastors in the Southern Baptist Convention were Freemasons, and how can you say that you're in darkness when you have Jesus in your heart? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And then that's not it. You go into the lodge, you're led around, like they call it circumambulation. You walk around the lodge. They have these officers, the junior warden, the senior warden at the different, things of the compass. And in the east is the worshipful master, who's like the big cheese. Then you're made to kneel at this altar. Again, you're still blindfolded, and you're made to understand that you're putting your hands on this huge, it's like a pulpit Bible, big King James Bible. And this guy comes forward, this worshipful master, and he says, we're going to lead you through this oath, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it would take like 5 minutes, but it's this long involved and ultimately blood-curdling oath. At the end, you swear the essence of the oath, you're going to keep the secrets of an entered apprentice Mason, which of course I'm violating right now. And then at the end, you swear that if I should ever reveal the secrets of an entered apprentice Mason, that I swear that I will have my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by the roots and buried in the sands of the sea, where the tide ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours, should I ever knowingly violate this, my entered apprentice obligation, so help me God, and keep me steadfast to the due performance of the saint. Now, if you were a Christian pastor or whatever, wouldn't that kind of raise the hair on the back of your neck? Yeah, I think it would raise the head on the back of the necks of pretty much most people just to hear that. Yeah, and then at that point the worshipful master says, my brother, in your current situation, what do you most desire? And then the guy that's with you, that he's a senior warden, says, light, whispers it in your ear. And I say, light. And then they remove the blindfold, and you see before you this big open Bible with a square and compass on it. And those represent the 3 great lights of Masonry, the Bible, the square, and the compass. And then they're revealed by the 3 lesser lights of Masonry, which are 3 burning tapers that are adjacent to the altar. Now that's the most mild initiation. From there on they get more and more creepy. So I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but basically Masonry is an anti-Christ thing. it claims it's not religious, but it is. They play around with it because they say, oh, well, we're just religious, but we're not a religion, because if they were a religion, then if you were already a Christian, you shouldn't join another religion. Most Christians would say that, like, if you're a Christian, you wouldn't become a Buddhist, right? Masonry is a religion. I mean, it has all the qualities. This is what I tell people. If you look at Webster's dictionary, there's 3 things that make something a religion, according to the Webster. Number 1, something that has a belief in some sort of deity. Masonry has that. Number 2, that belief is expressed in some sort of ritual, and Masonry is full of ritual. I mean, that's pretty much all it is. And then the third quality is it has a system of some sort of ethics or morality, and Masonry has that. So Masonry is a religion, and it's an antichrist religion. And the problem is that basically, if you drill down into this deep enough and read the books that are written by people like Albert Pike, like Albert Mackey. These are 2, or Arthur Edward Waite. These are 3 prominent scholars of 19th century, early 20th century Masonry, and all of them were occultists. Arthur Edward Waite, he wrote a book on black magic and pacts, how to sell your soul to the devil. And in my book, shameless plug, this is an older edition, this is the first edition. It looks different now, but in my book, I document how almost every single leading occult person of the late 19th and early 20th century was a Freemason. They just go together like, love and marriage. If people want to go look at these books, I just want you to kind of give them an idea, because if they want to confirm that for themselves, what books are you talking about? What people are you talking about? Well, there's Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. He was like the greatest Masonic scholar in America in the 19th century. He was the sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite, and he's buried in the Scottish Rite Temple, 13 blocks from the White House, so that's one. The other one is Albert Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. There's Arthur Edward Wade, who has a whole bunch of books on Masonry. Again, all of these were footnoted in my book. I mean, the last lots of pages of footnotes, because I'm not just making this stuff up. The other person who really you need to pay attention to in all of this, because he's more contemporary. Have you ever heard of Manly P. Hall? I have. Yeah. Well, he was one of the most notable occultists in America in the 20th century. He passed away in 1994, I think. He was the head of the Philosophical Research Society. He was a very high-level ceremonial magician, and he was also a 33rd degree Mason, and he wrote this book, Lost Keys of Freemasonry. In that book, among many things, he says that when you become a Master Mason, you are like a warrior on the block. And that's kind of a Masonic code. And the seething energies of Lucifer are yours to command. So these are like the biggest Freemasonic figures that we know about today, and yet most Freemasons have no idea about this. Yeah, because they don't read the books. They join the lodge for whatever reason. It might be for business, because see, it used to be that up until I think the early 90s, lawyers and doctors were not allowed to advertise. They couldn't put like an ad in the telephone book. It was like an ethics thing. And so the only way that lawyers and doctors could kind of build up business was by Masonry. They joined the Masonic Lodge, they send referrals to one another, a good old boys network. So that's why a lot of people joined the lodge. Many people joined it because they had an uncle or a father or a brother who was in it. And honestly, unless you really understand the occult, it's boring. I mean, imagine the most boring church service you've ever been at. And having spent 5 years in the Mormon Church, I can relate to that. But it's just, guys were sitting there snoring during the Masonic ritual when I was there. And, because it's like watching paint dry, and they go every week. And when I was involved in this, I was like the youngest guy in the lodge by 20 years. All these guys were like 50, 60, 70 years old, And basically they were there because they were buddies, and afterwards they, play poker and eat, sandwiches or something. But what none of these men understand, I don't think, is that deep down inside there's this very dark, evil energy, which is very sexualized. We document in the book how many men that have come to us over the years for deliverance. They were in Masonry, and they began to be drawn into wickedness, into perversion, and even into pedophilia. And it's dark, dangerous stuff, because it opens up unholy desires within the men, and then because of the way the spiritual world works, that in turn percolates down into their family, and it affects the wife, who may or may not be involved, because there's a women's order of Masonry called the Order of the Eastern Star, whose symbol is a Satanic pentagram, by the way. So anyway, it affects your children. So many men that were Masons at first, it didn't appear a problem, but when their children started hitting puberty, they just started to go in various ways nuts because of this trickle-down influence of the Masonic Lodge. Well, again, there was this group in Chicago, and they were entwined with this Memphis-Misraïm rite. And they were also with this, it was like two things together, the Brotherhood, which I mentioned earlier, and then this Memphis-Misraïm thing. And I interacted with these people, and at a certain point they said, well, if you want to go any further and become a Satanic priest, you need to, sell your soul to the devil. And so they took me to this park in Glen Ellen, Illinois, which is like a suburb of Chicago. I don't know if it's still there or not, but it was a very weird part. This was broad daylight, and they said, don't worry about it. The cops are all devil worshipper. And in the center of the park, there was this like area where they had these weird Egyptian statues. There literally was an altar with horns, kind of like the pictures you see of the altar in the Temple of Solomon, that kind of thing. And they brought out this black book, and there were all these names in it, and this one supposed high-level Satanist kind of officiated, and I swore an oath to Satan, my allegiance to him, that I would serve him for 7 years and he would give me everything I wanted, wine, women's song power, occult power, whatever. And at the end of those 7 years, he could kill me and take me to hell. By that time, I'd been told that Satanists believe that hell is like one long orgy of drugs, sex, and rock.